There are days that I've come to my office after an announcement of a case and closed my door and cried. There have been those days, and there are likely to be more.
I mean, Mark, that is a very telling statement from Justice Sotomayor. What does that reveal to you about that dynamic on the court?
Oh, it reveals a whole lot, because every May, Justice Sotomayor goes out and gives a public talk where she gives a little preview of what's to come and how bad it'll be. And this year, she is jumping up and down, waving the red flag. She is warning us that we have a lot of really bad decisions to come, so awful that they disturb her to the point of tears. And remember, we've got more than a dozen major cases piling up on the Supreme Court's docket. They've got all of these blockbusters still to hand down. And I think Justice Sotomayor is telling the public, you better brace yourself, because this is going to be a disaster of epic proportions.
Hi there, my name is Suri Crowe, and you are watching the MeidasTouch Network. Those comments from Justice Sonia Sotomayor are heart-wrenching to me. She is telling us just how far off course our current right-wing extremist Supreme Court truly is. And honestly, in my opinion, we didn't need the MAGA insurrectionist flags flying at both homes of Samuel Alito to convince us of that. Just look at the crazy rulings that this court has handed down over the last several years.
Justice John Roberts actually have control of this court?
I would argue that there's no control anytime MAGA is in the room. That's just the bottom line. And while Alito and while Thomas may not have come up through MAGA, Amy Coney Barrett did, along with Kavanaugh. We know that there's a lot of MAGA in the room. And Alito and Thomas came in and they wanted to be MAGA. They really did. But that's not where the Republican Party was at the time. And so now you're looking at a court. I mean, Roberts is usually who we look at for the swing. I mean, this is bad. Like, this is really, really bad.
Now, in the next few weeks, we could see a Supreme Court hand down rulings that will decide whether mifepristone is legal for women to use for abortion health care. They will decide on obstruction cases involving January 6th insurrectionists, the expansion of yet even more gun rights. This court is very pro the gun industry. This time, they'll decide whether perpetrators of domestic violence should hold on to the right to have access to guns, which is crazy, in my opinion. They will decide on the ability of federal agencies to regulate environmental protections that make our planet safer, clean water to drink, clean air to breathe, and so on. And of course, the presidential immunity question. This Supreme Court is so far off the rule of law envisioned by the white male landowners who wrote our Constitution that should tell us all just how far off this court truly is. Justice Sotomayor's comments to me are very telling. What she's telegraphing is that our democracy is in tatters, and we better hold on for yet another rocky ride as we head into this election. Here is another quote from the speech that Justice Sotomayor gave at Harvard. She says, "There are moments when I am deeply, deeply sad. And there are moments when, yes, even I feel desperation. We all do. But you have to own it. You have to accept it. You have to shed the tears, and then you have to wipe them and get up and fight some more." Pretty honest comments from a Supreme Court justice. The idea that Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas feel no compunction whatsoever to hide their bias and fealty to the MAGA right wing should come as no surprise, because for decades they have been funded by extremist right-wing billionaires via the hand of Leonard Leo, who has handpicked a court that will install a theocracy, a theocratic government in America if we continue to allow them to get away with this. And by the way, this did not just start with Donald Trump and his 3 Supreme Court appointees. This started way back with the Bushes.
First Supreme Court justices were not appointed by the worst president. Donald Trump's 3 Supreme Court justices have not yet proven themselves to be worse or more ethically challenged than the 2 who are now in an intense competition for the title of worst Supreme Court justice, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. They were each appointed 15 years apart by presidents from Connecticut who wanted you to believe they were from Texas. The Bushes were born in Connecticut, where the family had deep roots. The father of the first President Bush was Prescott Bush, a Republican senator from Connecticut. The Bush family preferred to go to college close to home, and so father and son presidents both went to Yale. They were what was then called country club Republicans, which simply meant they hated paying taxes. The first President Bush was a supporter of Planned Parenthood before he was selected to be Ronald Reagan's running mate in 1980, whereupon he had to suddenly pretend that he was opposed to any and all abortions. By the time George W. Bush was running for president, country club Republicans had been banished from the party and replaced by born-again Christians, which George W. Bush claimed to be. 1988 was one of those years when presidential campaign polls could not have been more wrong, giving Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis a 17-point lead in the summer over Vice President George H.W. Bush. We are suffering with the reign of Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court because George H.W. Bush won the presidential election in 1988, served only one term, and left only one legacy: Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas, who has clearly become the most publicly corrupt Supreme Court justice in history.
Elections have consequences. They truly do. Decades after both Bushes left the White House, their Supreme Court picks are having devastating consequences on our republic. The consequences of the MAGA majority on the Supreme Court are already taking a massive toll on women and girls' lives, and a Civil Rights Act that has basically been stripped down to almost nothing. And Alito hammered the nail in that coffin when he wrote the opinion, the decision that allowed a gerrymandered Republican map to remain in South Carolina, one that disenfranchises predominantly Black voters. So civil rights be damned, according to these guys. It's time for some serious court reforms, and Democrats are finally, my God, finally pushing for these. Here's firecracker Congresswoman from Texas, Jasmine Crockett, with more on that.
Listen, we're not going to play with this. We know who Alito is. He's not trying to hide who he is. I mean, I know he tried to hide behind his wife during the first incident, but he has nothing to say about this second incident. You know, I had my little drama that happened in oversight. Unfortunately, what wasn't covered was that the court reform task force was rolled out the exact same week. And in that task force, we've got three major things that we're looking at. We're looking at, number one, term limits. No more than 18 years. We're also looking at expanding the court because we know right now that we literally cannot trust these folk. And the last thing that we're looking at is making sure that there's some actual ethics reform. So we have three bills that we're pushing forward with. We're trying to educate the rest of our colleagues on it, and we're trying to hopefully get some movement in the House, and then, you know, we just pray about the Senate.
Now, President Biden has yet to come out and say that he will now move to expand the court. Previously, he has been very opposed to doing that. He's Mr. Institutionalist, after all, but pressure is building because we simply cannot remain here where a tiny little majority of MAGA nuts in robes are dictating the laws for millions of us, for millions of Americans who completely disagree with them. I've been thinking a lot lately about whether we truly have a democracy. And honestly, we never really did. As long as women and people of color did not have the same exact rights that white men did, and as long as the Electoral College is far from representative of what the popular vote wants, we don't. And for decades, by the way, the popular vote has consistently voted for Democrats and their policies. So if we were going by the popular vote, we would never be in the hot mess that we are in with this minority rule. Remember, it was an activist court that handed George W. Bush a victory over Al Gore, who won the popular vote in that election. And if you aren't aware, Al Gore very generously conceded that election to former President Bush, even though many would argue he actually won, and it was decided by an activist court. So, we really have to come out in overwhelming numbers this November, overwhelming the Electoral College, just painting the map blue in order to save what is left of our freedoms and to rebuild, pursuing a more perfect union. And we've heard President Biden speak a lot about that lately. We are not a perfect republic. We are a democracy that is on the backslide. We're on the back foot, but we can fix it if we, the people, come out and say, no, we're not going to roll over and accept this. Remember, that is what autocrats and authoritarians want us to do, is to feel hopeless and to give up. So we're not going to do that. And, you know, on the topic of Joe Biden, you may not love him. I have some serious disagreements with President Biden and his administration, particularly over their handling of the Gaza situation. And yes, his reluctance to expand the Supreme Court, but I do trust him to put prudent jurists on the federal bench. He's already appointed 200 federal judges, and their decisions will rule for decades to come, long after he's left office. Same thing with this MAGA Supreme Court, unless we demand reform.
We are living in the world created by the voters who, through neglect or their own choice, elected George W. Bush, and the voters who, through neglect or their own choice, elected Donald J. Trump. There is only one way for us to stop the control of our lives by the first president and his Supreme Court justices, and the first President Bush and the second President Bush and Donald Trump and their Supreme Court justices, and that is to vote for a president who will not appoint people like Samuel Alito to the Supreme Court. There's only one person now, one person, standing between us and the next Samuel Alito. And that person is Joe Biden.
So there you have it, guys. Comes down to really one choice this November. You may not be thrilled with everything that President Biden is doing or not doing or whatever, but he is a man who values freedoms and democracy. My name is Suri Crowe, and you are watching the MeidasTouch Network. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I do hope to see you back here very soon. Please comment. Give me your thoughts on this video. I actually do read quite a few comments, even though I'm not able to respond to them all. I really like to see what the Meidas Mighty are thinking, what you guys' thoughts are. Like and share this video so we can get the word out, because we are at an existential choice this November. And I say this in every video I'm doing lately. We really are. I want to make sure that I'm putting my all out there and that you guys are too. Okay? All right. Peace.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram at MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.